This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
When a guard would stop and talk to you, you used to stand back and you would yell so people could hear what you were saying to that guard as they walked by or within the vicinity.
But he knew what a convict was going to do before they thought of it themselves. He'd just been around that long, and he was tough.
They'd find Sprocky in about every conceivable place you could imagine, which we would, of course, dump.
They'd wait until everybody was locked up, and he would open his door and run down to cell one and get a bugler can full of Sprocky and take it back to his cells.
She had a kind of a hypnotic power. There were a great many wild cats around the penitentiary, and most people couldn't get near them. But she would stand in the doorway of the cell house and say, "Kitty, kitty, kitty," and those cats would go to her.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our first Stool Pigeon Saturday of the new season, and we are so thrilled to have in the studio with us Judy Louise Buck, who is the granddaughter of Hattie McCormick, who we talked about earlier this week. So Judy Louise, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted.
Oh, goodness. You called us after you got the numbered book, correct? And we just have been talking ever since, and
I heard a program on NPR that talked about the book.
Okay.
So immediately I called and ordered it and went from there.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's just start off a little bit. Do you want to tell us like a little bit about yourself and your connection, maybe some memories of your grandmother that you have? Just start there.
Well, I am the oldest daughter of one of Hattie's younger children. She had 6 children with her first husband, and then after that was before prison, and then after that she remarried and had 3 more daughters. So my mom is the middle daughter, Fern. And I grew up knowing my grandmother as just this wonderful, kind, gentle, cheerful person.
Sure. Yeah. And you, we've talked before, and you had said that you were not quite old enough to attend her funeral. Is that right? But you have some memories of...
Right. I think I figured out I was about 8 years old, and there were several children that were considered too young to go to the funeral. But I had at the time a cousin living right near... Grandma had a little cottage in Huntington, Oregon, and then one of her daughters had a cottage right next to her, and her son was there. So he and I went out and gathered, and I think some of the other children too, gathered big bouquets of these wild sunflowers because we knew Grandma loved those, and sent those to the cemetery.
Sure. And so being about 8 by the time she died, do you have any distinct memories of interacting with her? You said, she was very kind and very warm. Are there any other, ways that you would like to talk about her and memories that you have?
Well, I remember driving from Boise to go see her, and we could see the big silvery trees in the distance and knew we were getting there close. I remember arriving one time when she was doing laundry and with this big old-fashioned wringer washer and being taught how to pound the release and not get my hands caught in it or my hair caught in it or whatever.
Wow. And you called her Grandma Rosie, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Her second marriage was to Fritz Rosenlauf. And I only just, as an adult recently, the light bulbs came on, and Rosie was short for Rosenlauf. It was just kind of, Rosenlauf was a big handle. But at that time, it was respectful. We called our grandmothers by Grandma, whatever last name, Grandma Rosenlauf. But that was kind of too much. So she was Grandma Rosie, and I just always thought of her in association with that flower.
Wow, that's great.
That's really sweet.
All right. So I guess my first question is like, how did you find out about the time that she spent in prison?
There was a family story growing up that when she left her first husband, she'd packed her 6 children in the buckboard and headed out to Idaho. And then, we were told that she was arrested for horse thieving, which seemed reasonable at the time. So then it was not until years later, my mom was on a tour of the historic prison and came face to face with her mom's mugshot. So then the fuller picture came to light, and we realized that, there were newspaper articles and all sorts of information that she'd actually been in prison for a while here in Idaho. Yeah. And the youngest children were at the orphanage here in Boise. And then the older boys were farmed out, I think, to another family, or their dad had custody of them at some point, but I'm not quite sure what their living arrangements were.
What a revelation. Like, how did that impact your mom at first? Was she...
Well, she was the one that told me about the horse thieving story. And so I think... she was shocked, but at the same time, she was so fascinated by her mom's history and her bravery to leave a husband and a marriage that wasn't happy for her and take her children. And we knew that she labored doing housekeeping and ironing and laundry and all that they grew up rather poor. I remember my mom talking about the excitement of when an older sister got married and invited all the kids that were scattered to come live with her. And so, she was into finding out more.
Okay.
And it became kind of a source of pride, actually.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
We've had quite a few that are like, wow, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
And they love that we have all this documentation about their family member. Then, I haven't seen a photo of this person in forever, this is, and it just happens to be a mugshot, not the most glamorous photo to have of your loved one, but it's a piece of history.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you have, because of sort of the interest that your family has taken in learning more about Hattie's story, you have some documents that we, as researchers and historians, we do not have access to. So do you want to maybe share one or two of those that you have that we have not been able to get our hands on, just to really get that letter, especially, I think, really shows the nature of your grandmother, which is something that we don't get through these records of their height and their weight and what religion they grew up in and things like that.
Yeah. So there were 3 younger children at the orphanage. 2 of the girls, the youngest one was 2 years old, and then her older sister had been admonished to take care of your little sister. And then, and I know at the time they were doing sewing and tailoring and different things here at the prison, so Grandma had opportunity to sew, and she made clothes. So this is a letter that was in the orphanage file, and it's dated June 7th, 1909, Boise, to the matron of the orphan's home. Dear Madam, I am sending some clothes to the McCormick children. The names of each one are on their clothes. And I want to just point out that the handwriting is beautiful. It's very easy to read. It's got a little bit of a flourish to it.
Yeah.
So, and her sentences are well formed and all that kind of stuff. I am also sending each of the little girls a teddy bear, as I promised to get them one some time ago, if they would be good little girls. And if it is not asking too much of your kindness, will you please tell them that their mother has sent the bears and made her promise good at last?
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
That is sweet.
I will send them some more clothes as soon as I get them made, hoping these will be all right. I remain yours respectfully, Hattie McCormick. And then at the bottom, give my love to my children.
Oh, that is truly, I think, maybe one of the sweetest letters that we have connected to any of our inmates, because it just is so sweet, and she clearly cares for her children and loves them so much. And that's just a side that because with the female inmates, we get, obviously, a lot of them are mothers, and clearly all of them care and love for their children for the most part. I shouldn't say all of them, but for the most part, all of them do. And but we don't get this opportunity to see that love in writing and action. And I love that letter, and thank you so much for sharing it. It's truly wonderful.
I can only imagine she had the same feeling writing that letter that you do reading that letter. Like, oh, that is
Thank you. Yeah. I've read it so many times and I always get emotional. I think I'll get through it.
Yeah. That's totally understandable.
And it's a piece of your family, it's that memory of that love and that warmth that you can get that just through the letter. And oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for the opportunity. And what pops into my mind is, because of their struggle, there was such a bond in the family. And I'm remembering that whenever somebody in that side of the family came to visit, everybody was watching the road and as soon as they arrived, people burst out the door to greet them, big hugs, It was like
wow. It's just a big, loving family and someone who got caught in an unfortunate circumstance. And that's a really, I love that.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Are there any other records that you would be interested in sharing with the audience that you yourself want to talk about? Or because I can talk about these on the podcast as well, but if there's any that you yourself would like to talk about or share, or finding them or having family find them or whatever, I
think it's kind of fun to emphasize that Grandma had 6 children with her first husband. She and as you've already disclosed in the book, numbered. She was married off as a young girl, about her 16th birthday. Then after she was divorced and after her prison term, she met another man, Fritz Rosenloff, and they had 3 more daughters. Right. And I know that they lived part of the time down in Jordan Valley. Mom taught us cowboy songs she learned from when they brought in the wild horses and, stuff like that. So, but the older children were quite young when Grandma went to prison. There is a sheet here that lists the 6 children. The youngest one was only 2.5 years old. Oh. And then they went up from there. 11 years old, I think, was the oldest one.
Wow. Those are young kids. And so the oldest kids were with the father. They were given to his custody, correct?
Yes. Now, apparently, there was the paper that I have was when their father went back to court. Hattie originally got custody of all 6 children.
Okay.
And then when she had her prison sentence, the father went back to court and he wanted the kids, but they agreed to split them. Okay. 3 and 3. So
and so even despite the fact that the older 3 went with the father, there still was a very close bond with all 9 of the kids, essentially. Okay.
Yes. And even growing up, I went with visits with my mom when she visited her older siblings.
Wow.
Yeah, and some of them were closer than others.
Sure.
Yeah.
In 2021, the Idaho State Historical Society is celebrating 140 years of service to Idahoans as the trusted source in protecting Idaho's historical places and artifacts and sharing its stories. The Old Idaho Penitentiary became part of the Idaho State Historical Society in 1975. As a part of the commemoration, the Old Idaho Penitentiary is committed to bringing you 140 unique stories about the people who worked, lived, and served time at the site through this podcast and the events and programs scheduled throughout the year. The Capturing 140 storytelling program offers a unique glimpse at lives filled with hope and despair and the enduring triumphs and tragedies at Idaho's only penitentiary from 1872 to 1973. Stay tuned.
Wow. There's one story that's really fun, just to give an idea of the poverty. 2 of her older brothers, as young boys, took their wagon around and collected old abandoned batteries.
Okay.
They figured out how to take them apart and repair them. Wow. And then they resold them. As adults, they had their own battery factory.
Wow.
That's genius.
That's awesome.
And I think that was in Portland when they had their battery factory.
Wow.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Jeez. Do you any idea what the name of the factory was?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't at all.
And you mentioned that your grandmother worked in Oregon, in Huntington, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and so you said she worked at the Union Pacific Railroad.
Yes, Union Pacific has a roundhouse, which I don't know if people know what that is, but I don't even know if they do this anymore. But the trains would come in, the engine would go into this gigantic building with track through the middle, and they would spin the track to turn the engine around, and then it would go back the other way.
Yeah.
So the roundhouse was in Huntington, and they had offices there, and Grandma worked at the offices there.
Wow. That's information that we never
Yeah.
would have known
Yeah.
if we had not been in, and if you had not contacted us first.
Yeah.
So
And she must have been there a number of years. She was living there when she passed away, and I remember visiting her there a number of times.
and she and Franz, I believe was his name. Is that correct? Your grandfather's Fritz. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
They remained married for the rest of their lives.
They did. Now, he was a sheep herder
Okay.
in kind of the Oregon-Idaho borderlands, and so he wasn't necessarily always around.
Okay.
He passed away from a fever he had contacted while he was out with his wagon and sheep. And at that time, my mom had gone to nurses training and was actually working in one of the hospitals here in Boise. And they brought her dad in, so she was with him when he passed away. Yeah.
Touching. This picture of Hattie and the whole family is really truly amazing. So you got in contact with us because of this numbered book that you had heard about on NPR, and so my question is what is your opinion on that book, especially given that your grandmother is featured so prominently in it?
Well, I was very excited about it. Very excited about it, and just delighted to share more of my information and see what more you had that would add to our family information. It was one of my cousins from my youngest aunt who had dug a lot of research and got these things that we have. Okay. And she lived here in Boise area for a while. She has passed away now, and somehow her records have disappeared. So I kind of have to start over, but I do have some things that she had shared with me earlier on.
So the numbered book, did you feel like it did as far as our records were correct or incorrect, did you feel like it really painted her in a fair light?
I think so. Obviously it's very brief for all of the women in there. I think in the book it says she had 8 children. She actually had 9 altogether. And so I'm not sure which one might have been left out of the records, but I do know that the older girl, Ethel, died when she was younger, but maybe as a teenager. I'm not real sure about that. So maybe she's the one that's left out of the count.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and it could be just because I think in the later years, what we may have found was a census, and if she had died, in her teenage years, then she would be missing from that count. So we do apologize for that error.
Well,
but
it's just totally all right. It's so easy to. It's difficult to get real accurate information when you're digging back through, and even some of the official records don't all agree with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love the book in that it gave such a, what do I want to say, the background, the environment, the whole flavor of the time and the struggle that women were going through. Absolutely. We knew Grandma had a struggle, but it was like, that wasn't unusual for women at the time. Right. And to be on the street as children and to be struggling to make ends meet. A lot of the crimes of the women were basic survival crimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, at a time when women were barely getting their rights about anything.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she came in before women could even vote, which is so hard, especially for someone my age to imagine, where that, my grandmother and my mother and, we've all always had the right to vote. And so to imagine that, your grandmother lived in a time where women didn't have the right to vote is crazy to me.
Yeah.
That was not that long ago. 100 years is not long ago.
It really wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, well, thank you. We had such a good time working on getting to know all of these women, and so excited when this book came out, and Anthony and everyone who worked on it did such an amazing job. And thank you for buying it and reading it, and especially with your, I think it would be easy for some families to get perhaps offended or be a little bit more sensitive about the fact that their grandmother was featured so prominently. But thank you for reaching out to us to talk to us about it.
You are so welcome, and thank you. I'm totally delighted to connect with you both.
So I guess one other question, only because your mother went through this, and I think, like Anthony has mentioned, this is something that actually happens quite frequently. Is there any advice that you might give to other people who come into the site and then stumble upon their family members? Is there anything that you might want to tell them or give advice about, or do you have anything that you would suggest?
Well, read numbered because it'll give you a more compassion for what they struggled with. So it will help you maybe not be so offended by it. And if you have these bits of information in your family, share it and talk about it. I think there are a few people in our family who were offended when they found out, but I think that's because they didn't maybe have the background stories even growing up. And their first discovery was looking at a portfolio of beautiful portraits of Grandma, and then here's her mugshot. And it's like, they were so shocked, they just really had a hard time knowing what to do with that. So I think it's important to share the information, share the possibilities, and just be so proud of them for surviving all that and carrying on.
Yeah, that's it. Still being good mothers and grandmothers, and
absolutely,
despite this setback coming to an institution.
Absolutely,
like this.
Because if anybody else is discovering that, obviously they're descendants.
Right.
So something good happened after.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great.
So was your grandmother, because you had the rumor that you knew at one point she was in jail.
Right.
Was she, as far as you or your family knows, was she somewhat open to talking? Like, if she was asked about it, would she talk about it, or was it kind of like hush hush in your family that she had been kept in jail or prison?
I never was aware of a discussion with Grandma about it. I just knew my mom, I was the oldest child. So there were times when Mom would just share these things with me. And it was kind of matter of fact, and I assumed everybody else knew, and it was no big deal. It was just kind of, it was like, yeah, Grandma. She packed up 6 kids and split, She knew how to drive the team.
Right. And the rumor was that she had stolen the horses from her husband as she was leaving. Is that what the rumor?
At that time, the property all belonged to the man.
Of course.
So if she ran off with it, that was not cool.
But yes, good for her for doing that. Oh, well, awesome.
And I don't know if that actually happened.
Sure.
Or if that was just kind of the cover story.
Right. Yeah.
She obviously left her husband and later got a divorce, which even in itself was a big deal.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, in the 1910s,
Any tips on researching family members? A lot of people, they like to do their own ancestry. How have you gone about doing that sort of thing?
Well, I really have intentions. I'm just technically crippled in the new age, but there are ancestry websites, and I have a couple of friends who have done a lot of research for me. What I've also realized is a lot of misinformation. So if you have details about your family, like, I remember my aunts. When the census and you can look at all the census, you can look at military records, you can look at death and birth certificates. All of that is available to look at. So then you can put those pieces together with your own story and figure it out. And I even realized one of the 3 youngest girls, Fuchsia, Fern, and Ellen, in one of the census, or as a result of one of the census records, Fuchsia's called Tertia. And it was never her name. And somebody even assumed that she must have had a twin. No, I remember her. There was no twin. But as I look at the actual census record, I can see where that F could have been, it looked like a T, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I can see the handwriting because it was somebody's personal handwriting.
Right.
And even if they got ages a little mixed up, and sometimes I worked on the census. Sometimes the person isn't home, they go to the neighbor. The neighbor might not know exactly who's older than whom.
Sure.
Yeah.
So research all those things and trust your own insights about it. And then, you know, what I hope to do further is help kind of correct some of those records and get this. And at some point, we'll have our own family albums that will include all of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's, I guess, the neighbor aspect is something that I had never considered because, you know, we go through Ancestry records all the time to try to get any sort of backstory on our inmates. And that you know, the census records are so confusing and contradicting a lot of the times. And so I never would have even thought to think that they would have gone to neighbors to ask. And that, you know, the neighbors are like, I don't know, they've got kids. Maybe their name is this.
Right.
So that's a really good point. And definitely some very good advice. Because, you know, we all have those family stories that they're not going to ever appear in public record. And they really, like we've seen, have really added to their story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I just love this opportunity. And there have been times in my life where I felt like my grandmother was watching over me. I raised 2 children as a single mom. Wow. And there were times when it was a real struggle. Sure. And I definitely, her story inspired me. Wow. And gave me courage when maybe I would have given up otherwise, you know.
Wow. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah,
this really has been so great and so fun to learn more about Hattie outside of, like I said, sort of those cold prison records that we have where it's just these are the facts and that's it. So thank you so much for driving all the way out here. I mean, you came from Buell, is that right?
Near Buell. I live out in the country near Buell.
Yeah. So thank you for coming all the way out here on a Tuesday morning. And it's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. It's wonderfully exciting, and my daughter had hoped to be here. She's been very much into her grandmother's history and stuff too, and not able to make it today. But anyway, she's in California, so she had to stay home.
That makes sense.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you too. Yes, wonderful. And I admired the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So we always like to close out our podcast with a certain phrase, and you haven't listened yet, so you don't quite know it. So if I were to say, "Do your own time," how do you think you would finish that sentence?
Ooh, that I don't know. I have to think about that one. Do your own time. If you were in prison, what would mean the most to you?
Yeah.
Do that.
Okay. Perfect. That's great. All right. Well.
Excellent, everybody. Do your own time.
Do your own number.
I'll see you next week.
Thank you. That was so great.
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Not only do we get to hear your feedback about the show, but it helps others find us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in today's episode, follow our Facebook group at Behind Gray Walls Podcast. And new this season, we have a podcast Instagram as well. You can find us on Instagram at Behind Gray Walls Pod.